Right, okay, my screen's gone blank for some reason, but anyway, not to worry. Well, good evening, councillors. Welcome to the meeting, the Audit and Governance Committee, which is being undertaken virtually in accordance with enacted government regulations during the current coronavirus pandemic. Before we start the meeting, can I please remind all members of the following? Please ensure you mute your microphones when not speaking. Please remain focused on the topic being discussed. Please try to avoid repeating points which have already been made. Please avoid interrupting other councillors and respect the position of the chair. Please remember this meeting is still being broadcast in the normal way via Facebook Live. It's important, therefore, that members are aware that the public can hear what is being said and decided on, and that the public can see councillors as well. Please therefore take care to prevent any background distractions. So with these matters in mind, can I call on Mark Devin to do a roll call of all councillors and officers so that we know who is in attendance, please?
Thank you, Chair. Can I ask councillors in attendance to please state you're present when I call your name? Councillor Wardle, please.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Atkinson.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Foggin.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Hannaford.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor David Henson.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Yolanda Henson.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Lamb, I don't believe is here. Councillor Mitchell.
Here.
Thank you. Councillor Oliver.
Present.
Thank you. And Councillor Warwick.
Present.
Thank you. I would just like to do a roll call of officers as well. Director of Finance, Dave Hodgson.
Present.
Thank you. Deputy Chief Finance Officer, Michelle White.
Present.
Oh, thank you. Litigation Solicitor, Litigation Solicitor, Simon Copper.
I think that's Service Lead Legal Services, Simon Copper, present.
Oh, apologies. I'll get that. I'll have that changed for you. Audit Manager, Helen Kelvey.
Present.
Thank you. Engagement Lead from Grant Thornton, Jackson Murray.
Present.
Thank you. The Audit Manager of Grant Thornton, Steve Johnson.
Present.
Thank you. Have myself and Sharon Sissons as Democratic Services Officers in attendance as well, and we are quorate to proceed, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mark. Well, thank you, members. The first item on the agenda this evening is apologies. Have we got any apologies, Mark?
No apologies received, but Councillor Lamb may still be on his way. Okay,
thanks very much. So the next item of business on the agenda is item 2 of the minutes of the meeting of the 16th of September. Are members present at that meeting happy to approve the minutes as a correct record of those proceedings? A show of hands or any amendments?
Yeah, I would say that. Oh, yeah, there goes Councillor Hannaford. I can't see Councillor Warwick, but all hands are up to approve, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. So no amendments to that by the sound of it. No.
I wasn't at the last meeting, that's why, Mark.
Okay,
that would make sense. Thank you.
That's pretty straightforward. Thank you very much. Right, I look forward to signing those minutes in the future. So the next item 3, declarations of interest. This is any members, any disclosable pecuniary interests relate to business on the agenda and have not already been included in the register of interest to declare them before any discussion takes place on the item. The next item is number 4, the Local Government Access to Information Act 1985 for the exclusion of the press and public. Well, as there aren't any part 2 items on the agenda, it doesn't appear that will need to apply. So item 5, external audit progress reports with the audit findings report. Can I ask our representative Jackson Murray, engagement lead from the City Council External Auditor Grant Thornton, to present this report? And I understand there's a PowerPoint presentation on the findings, which has been circulated already as a supporting document. Over to you, Jackson.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good evening, everybody. Yes, so that's correct. There's a couple of documents to cover under this agenda item, which have been circulated to committee members and are available on the council's website. If it's okay with committee members.
Excuse me, before you start, did you send the Hensons any by post? Because all our stuff comes by post.
Sorry, Councillor Henson, it's Sharon here. I did explain, unfortunately, I was unable to get to post that, so I did send some emails.
Oh,
So I'm very
I
sorry.
take your part. That's all right. I take that.
I
So
do
we have.
So
Thank you.
what I can
Thank you.
try and do is, I believe I'm able to try and share screen. So if that would be appropriate, I can try and share my screen to run through that document if you've not been able to receive that.
Yes, that's fine.
So what I'm going to propose to do, the document that I'm going to run through first is a document that we sent out to officers a number of months ago. And this focuses on informing our audit risk assessment for the financial statements audit for the year 2019-20. Now, normally this would have come through to yourselves as a committee earlier in the year. Unfortunately, when this was sent out, this was when meetings were being cancelled or postponed due to COVID-19. So what this document does is ask a number of questions of management, which are required to be asked by our auditing standards. So this document sets out the questions that we've asked. So for example, I don't know if members can actually see the document I'm presenting at the moment. Are you able to see the document that I've got on screen?
Yeah,
with the binoculars, yes.
Okay, let me see if I can improve that slightly. So what we've got are a number of
that's
questions.
better.
Yeah, so we have a number of questions that we pose to management as required by our auditing standards. So question number one, for example, key events or issues that have had a significant impact on the financial statements. Management then provide ourselves with responses to each of those questions. We consider those as part of our financial statements audit risk assessment and identify if there are any specific issues that are raised in response to our questions that we would need to factor into our audit approach. Now, the reason it's coming before you as audit committee is to consider the responses and to also ensure that there aren't any responses on here that go against your understanding of the council. So we raise these questions both to management and then bring them to you as in your role as those charged with governance to understand those responses. We received these responses from management. They haven't resulted in any additional significant audit risks that we have previously reported to you, but that's the purpose of this document. Now, I'm conscious that some councillors will not have been able to see this document, so I don't know what would be easiest to propose. I'm happy to go through this document on the pages and the responses that management have provided, just so that you're able to review those and comment as appropriate. Or if other councillors have been able to review this document, take any questions on any of the responses that we received from management.
Can I, Chairman, can I comment on that?
Please.
I wouldn't accept that for the simple reason is it takes time to absorb and to go through it. I would clearly, I couldn't answer that question if I haven't seen the document, by which case David can speak for himself. But on my point, it takes time for me to go through a document, and I do go through documents, but as I'm seeing it on screen, it's totally impossible for a councillor to say, I agree with this, even going through it tonight, because it simply wouldn't be done. You can't, so I can't, for one, couldn't absorb that tonight and give you a true answer.
Right. Well, what do other councillors feel about this? Yeah. Right, okay, there aren't any. I think probably, Jackson, it's probably better if you just run through the salient points as you see it. You see them.
Chair Dave Hodgson has his hand up.
All right, okay, Dave. Yeah, please. Yes, David.
Sorry, perhaps just to support members, this is quite a technical document asking a whole host of technical accounting questions. So if just as an example, if I take the third question, these are questions such as, is there any use of financial instruments within the accounts? These are not questions that I would expect members to fully understand and be able to say hand on heart what a financial instrument is of a derivative unless you're a qualified accountant. Therefore, you pay myself and Michelle to provide these judgments. What Jackson's really looking to see is that you're satisfied that we will have answered those questions appropriately on behalf of Exeter City Council, rather than you taking a detailed look and saying, yes, you're perfectly happy that we've identified the CCLA property fund and money market funds as financial instruments. So it's just a case of you signing off, as you do many times, areas of professional judgment by the officers.
Okay. Right, thank you, David.
Can I come in there? It's my comment on that. Could I thank the 5-1 officer for explaining that, because that's made it quite clear. I wouldn't know, and you're quite right. No, I accept your comment, and I accept the view of your decision.
Okay, thank you. Right, any further comments then, please?
For Councillor Mitchell, Chair.
Yes, Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you, Chair. There was just one small point. It might not be directly the order, it might be the council. There was reference, and it was a question 3 under law and reputation or regulation that related to a formal breach of the health and safety executive breach in housing. And I'm just wondering, when situations like this occur, how are they reported to us through the audit governance process? Because this is an ongoing investigation.
Right, thank you. Thank you.
Yep.
Can someone answer that, please?
I don't know whether the service lead legal has any comment. This is a legal matter that's been dealt with.
Yes, I think what I would say is you can see from the entry that this is an ongoing matter, and it will be reported appropriately, and we'll have to give some consideration to how that is reported once the matter is concluded. But that's some time off before it will be concluded.
So is that a matter that would logically come back to this committee or go elsewhere?
I'm not sure. We would have to give some consideration to the appropriate committee.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further points, please? Well, it seems as though we might be able to dispose of this matter fairly quickly then. So can I have a show of hands to note the position?
Oh, sorry, Chair. Councillor Hannaford's hands just.
Oh, sorry, I did. Yes, I can't see.
So sorry, Tony. So just for clarification, this is the. I mean, are we agreeing because of the time lag with the data that if members aren't happy to vote in favour of this because they haven't been able to digest the information, we would be abstaining, would we? Or is it an overview that doesn't go into that sort of detail that we need to bother with?
David Hodgson, are you able to advise on that one, please?
I would suggest if members don't feel that they're in a position to vote in favour, that they should abstain. But as I said, this is a selection, as you can see, quite a significant selection. It's 30 pages long of questions that were asked of officers to help support Grant Thornton in understanding the audit risk. prior to starting the external audit. And as such, we provide those responses. This is merely a request to members to acknowledge and say you're satisfied with the responses. If you haven't had a chance to read it, I would fully understand if you wish to abstain.
Thank you very much, David, for that. Right, well, can we have a show of hands, please, either to note the position and the report, or to abstain if you feel you have to?
Note.
Taking the support first or the abstain?
Support first, yes, please.
You can't see it, Dave.
So, Councillor Hannaford, have you if you put the video on so we can see if you've got your hand up, or
blue hand?
No, Mark, I'll abstain because I don't think I've had a chance to digest the information properly. So I don't feel it's right. I should rubber stamp something that I haven't read.
Brilliant, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So it's 1, 2, 3. So Mrs. Henderson, sorry, I can't quite.
I'm abstaining.
Abstaining, thank you.
Abstaining.
So it's 1, 2.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
And Tony, if I could just say, I think it needs to be made clear that this report came out after the papers, did it not?
Yes. Yes.
So it's not a case that Councillor Henson and I, haven't had due diligence. It's the fact that it's come out late and we've not had a chance to read it properly because it came out late. I think that ought to be minuted.
Right. Okay.
Chair,
So
if I may just go for clarification, it's a bit difficult to see with the hands.
Sure.
If I could just ask for members just to state for, against, or abstaining.
For.
Councillor Atkinson, please.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Foggin.
Abstain.
Thank you. Councillor Hannaford, abstention.
Abstain. Yeah. Thank you.
Councillor David Henson.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs. Henson.
Abstain.
Abstain. No, Councillor Lang. Councillor Mitchell.
4.
4. Thank you. Councillor Oliver.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Warwick.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Wardle.
4.
4. Thank you. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And 3. So that's 6 votes in favour with 3 abstentions, Chair.
Thank you, Mark. Much obliged. So we now.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. So what I propose to do now, if that's okay with yourself, is to run through the audit findings report for Exeter City Council for the 2019-20 financial year, which is the other item on this agenda piece. If that's okay.
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
So the report in front of you, the audit findings for Exeter City Council, essentially sets out the findings of our 2019-20 audit and our responsibilities both for the financial statements audit opinion and whether financial statements are true and fair, and also the council's value for money conclusion. So as has been discussed previously, this report was issued later than the agenda, and the rationale for that was to ensure that this was as up to date as possible at the time that it was sent out, given that the audit is still ongoing. So there was a list of items that were outstanding in terms of the financial statements audit on page 5 of the additional report document, page 3 of our report. I'm pleased to say a number of those items have now been concluded satisfactorily, and we're on track and aiming to issue the council's audit opinion prior to the end of this calendar month, prior to or on or before 30th of November, which is the revised deadline set by the updated coronavirus regulations. Headlines for financial statements audit are that, subject to the finalisation of the last bits of our testing, our audit report, our audit opinion will be unqualified, which is hopefully good news for members. The change from previous years, and this is a national issue in respect of COVID-19, is that there will be something called an emphasis of matter paragraph in our audit opinion. Now, this is in regards to the valuation of the council's land and building and its investment properties. And as I said, this is a national issue. So RICS, the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, issued guidance to all valuers to state that due to coronavirus, COVID-19, and the pandemic, there was more uncertainty that could be placed on property valuations and land valuations. Now, the council discloses that within its financial statements because its expert valuers who it employs to value its land and buildings state that in their professional valuation report. So what our audit opinion does is draw the reader's attention, so the reader of our audit opinion that is, draws the reader's attention to the note and the disclosures within the council's own accounts that state there is a material valuation uncertainty due to COVID-19. As I said, this is an issue across local government and across the country, not just in local government. So all local government sets of accounts that we've seen have this disclosure in it. So Exeter are not alone in this. We're just, because of the specific nature of it, we're required to include an emphasis of matter paragraph in our audit opinion. So high level financial statements, audit, unqualified opinion. Value for money arrangements. We've also completed our risk-based review on council's value for money arrangements and anticipate issuing an unqualified value for money conclusion alongside our financial statements opinion as well. As I said, we're on track to deliver those on or before the 30th of November, which is the updated timetable for doing so in local government this year. We've not exercised any of our additional statutory powers or duties, and I think it's probably fair to say that COVID-19 has had a big impact on the audit. So for the first time ever, we have audited and the council has been audited fully remotely. So we've been doing that via screen sharing, via calls such as this and virtual means to enable us to complete the audit. So I think I'd thank officers for embracing the new technology and working from home, as we've all had to do. There's been some benefits to working from home and there's been some disbenefits. And I think the fact that we're still discussing the audit towards the end of November and we're doing that across the country shows that COVID's had a big impact on council and audit teams across the country in terms of the time taken to deliver and undertake audits. And we're also mindful that during the audit process, officers have had business as usual to deal with, but also a huge number of other central government returns and COVID grants, etc., to administer to local businesses. So I appreciate that. The rest of our report sets out in some more detail the work that we've done against the significant audit risks that we'll have previously reported to you through our audit plan, along with a number of other disclosures that we are required to make in relation to our auditing standards and our ethical standards that we undertake our audits in respect of. I think the high level summary, other than the land and building valuation point that I've already touched on, are that we've identified some adjustments to the financial statements. These are largely disclosure adjustments or classification adjustments, so moving values from one line in a financial statement or a note to another line. Those are in line with what we would expect to identify at any audit. There aren't significant numbers of unadjusted errors or large material errors that have had an impact on the financial statements, which is pleasing to see. There was one classification that is impacted on the prior year's accounts. So this was in relation to the appeals provision in respect of the council's non-domestic rates. It was previously classified in the balance sheet as a creditor, and it's been now split out to be shown separately as a provision on the balance sheet. And in the updated financial statements, which officers will talk through after this agenda item, that adjustment has been made and fully explained. So we're satisfied with the disclosures and the accounting treatment that has been adopted for 1920 and moving back to 1819. That's probably all I was going to mention in terms of the financial statements audit at this stage before I take any questions. I'll just briefly touch on value for money audit before I do that. So the key risk area that we identified, as you'll remember from our audit plan, related to the financial outturn and financial sustainability. Again, this is an issue that we identify pretty much around the country at all local government organisations, given some of the financial challenges they're facing. And our commentary in our report sets out the 2019-20 revenue budget outturn and the transfers to reserves off the back of that outturn due to some of the more technical adjustments that were put through, and also considering the council's medium-term financial plan in some more detail, the assumptions that underlie that, and also towards the end of the financial year under audit, and obviously our current financial year, the impact of COVID and the impact of COVID on the council's finances and moving forward. As I said at the beginning, we propose to issue an unqualified value for money conclusion for 2019-20 on the council's value for money arrangements. I won't go through any of the other detail in the report, but happy to take any questions from members on anything I've said or anything else in our report.
Right, so many thanks, Jackson, for that. Members, any questions, please?
Question from Councillor Mitchell, Chair.
Councillor Mitchell, please.
Thank you, Chair. Could we return to the commercial portfolio investments that we have? Whilst you mentioned COVID, it was generally realised that the economic downturn has led to a devaluation affecting commercial property portfolios. And a number of councils are in serious problems because of their investment programmes through borrowing in the commercial property market. We've been reassured that Exeter is in no such situation, and we have sound balances within our commercial property portfolio. So could you reassure us that our position is a lot stronger than many other local authorities? And secondly, the current programme is to have a 20% revaluation each year in a cyclical arrangement. In view of the potential for declining commercial property values, do you think that in future we'll be involved in a greater percentage of revaluations each year?
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Chair. So if I take the first question around the commercial property valuation, so there's a couple of elements to that. So there's the financial reporting and the accounting impact of those properties. Now, the SIPFA code that the council prepares the accounts to requires that investment properties are valued annually. So each year at the balance sheet date, the valuer will assess the valuation of all of the council's commercial properties. So as at the 31st of March 2020, which is the financial statements under audit, the council's valuer has assessed the valuation of those assets. We've considered on sample basis those valuations and challenged the assumptions applied by the valuer, and also understood their expertise, qualifications, competence, etc. So we don't have any significant findings to bring to your attention as a result of those valuations. I suppose the other comment, and you raised there around commercial property, is potentially the rents that are received on those properties. We've been assured that the council continues to receive the rents on those properties, and I think one of the things that needs to be considered in respect of commercial investments and commercial properties is probably the portfolio as a whole. So what's the diversity of that portfolio? Clearly, if all of your properties are in the same sector and something happens to that sector in the future and there's a downturn, which means it may not be more attractive or commercial rents can't be received, then that's a more challenging position than if you've got a more balanced property portfolio. And clearly that's what we would look to see and hope to see in all of our councils. I'm not suggesting that there's any significant issues that we've identified during our audits this year around those issues. So that takes the point of, I think, the valuations and also the commercial property. As I said, investment properties are valued annually. So every one of those properties will have been valued as at 31st of March 20 and will be done again at 31st of March 21. The 5-year rolling programme is for the council's other assets. And there's two kind of key pools of assets there that I would say. So you've got the council dwellings within the HRA. So the DCLG, as it was, stock valuation guidance, states that they must be subject to a full valuation every 5 years, and in those intervening years, the council's valuer is able to do undertake a desktop exercise valuation. So in 2019-20, a desktop valuation was undertaken. In 2018-19, that was the last full valuation. So there has been an uplift or reduction in property values for the HRA in year, but they weren't subject to a full valuation. That's allowable under the guidance. And similarly, the SIPFA code states that 5-year rolling programme, so assets must be fully revalued at a minimum every 5 years. As a result of a previous year audit recommendation, that programme was revisited for 1920, so a minimum of 20% is valued, as well as the top 4 highest value assets from the previous year. And then when the valuer considers those assets valued in year, if there's any significant movements on those specific assets, they then consider, is that indicative of a wider market impact, which would then lead to further assets being valued. So the 20% is very much a minimum and is in accordance with the SIPFA code. As auditors, we also consider, as part of our challenge, given those valuations may not have taken place in 1920, what evidence is there to support that those values are still materially accurate in the balance sheet? So that's a big part of our work on that specific risk that we have around valuation of land and buildings.
So just to summarise, could I say that on a 5-star rating, you would give us 5 stars as against many other local authorities who wouldn't reach those heights?
In terms of the valuations, yeah, the work we've done this year, we're satisfied.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions, please?
Dave Hodgson has his hand up, Chair.
Yes, Dave.
I just thought it might be helpful to put the council's point of view and give members some information surrounding commercial property. As members are well aware, we don't hold commercial property purely for yield. All our commercial property is in Exeter and supports Exeter businesses. So we perhaps have a different approach, a different responsibility to our tenants, to some of those councils who have perhaps bought commercial property outside their own area. In terms of the performance, in terms of rent, it's actually been quite positive, very positive, in fact, considering the significant challenges that businesses have faced this year. And we have indeed recovered the vast majority of rent, but we're also supporting businesses as well. So we're working with them on deferral plans to support them where they're struggling, as we do in any year. So for members should be satisfied that the current position is well within. It's far better than was projected when we produced the emergency budget back in July. But you should be comforted that we are trying to support local businesses at the same time and help them through this pandemic.
Thank you very much, David. Any further questions, please?
No. Councillor Atkinson, sorry, Chair.
Councillor Atkinson.
I just want to say that this really makes me feel very happy that this is a very financially stable and well-run council, and I'd like to thank the chief financial officers. That continues to be the case. No significant concerns have been raised by the auditor. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions, please?
No other hands are raised.
Okay, well, can we have a show of hands to note the position and the report, please?
4. Sorry, I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That's nine votes in favour, Chair. That's unanimous.
Thank you very much.
That's been noted.
9, 4. Okay. Right, well, that brings us to item 6, the statement of accounts 2019 and 20. And the Deputy Chief Finance Officer, Michelle White, will present this report. Michelle.
Thank you, Chair. Jackson's already covered the key audit findings. This report sort of replicates the findings and the key changes that we've made to the draft accounts that were provided to the auditors on the 31st of July. So I am pleased that the auditors are expected to provide an unqualified audit opinion on those accounts. I'm not proposing to go through the statement of accounts themselves. Obviously, it's a 140-page document. I'm happy to pick up any questions you have. The only probably area that I had in mind to just sort of mention was that since we sent round the statement of accounts to you on the agenda, we've made one final narrative change where we're highlighting the risk of the property investments held by the Devon Pension Fund, which are subject to material uncertainty due to COVID-19. So we have now disclosed that as a risk uncertainty, which could impact on the valuation of the pension fund. So that's been a change since we released that document to you, and that's all I have to say really today. So I'm happy to pick up any questions.
Many thanks, Michelle. Any questions, members, please?
I can't see it. Oh, just Dave Hodgson's hand. No, I can't see any other hands raised.
Did Dave want to speak on this?
Yeah, just very briefly to highlight to members for comfort that although there may be material uncertainty around the pension fund actually has a statutory override, so it won't impact directly on the council taxpayer, regardless, until the next valuation, when it probably will.
Okay, thank you. No further questions, apparently. So I think we've got to have a roll call on this particular report, members, in order to approve the audited accounts so they can be signed by myself as chair and the Director of Finance, forwarded to the external auditor, Grant Thornton. So can we have a roll call, Mark, please?
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Atkinson, please.
Approve.
Thank you. Councillor Foggin. Oh, you're on mute, Councillor Foggin.
Approved.
Thank you. Councillor Hannaford, please.
For.
Thank you. Councillor David Henson.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Yolanda Henson.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Mitchell.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Oliver.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Warwick. Oh, sorry, I didn't hear that. Sorry, did you?
For.
Oh, for. Thank you. Councillor Wardle, please.
For.
Thank you. That is a unanimous vote in favour, Chair. That has been approved.
Many thanks indeed. Okay, so now move to item 7, which is the management representation letter, which is the
David
Director of
Hodgson.
Finance. Sorry, the Director of Finance, Dave Hodgson, will present the letter.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Before I start, I would like to formally note my thanks and appreciation not only to the finance team, who've done an incredible job in producing a full statement of accounts in such unique circumstances, but also like to acknowledge the work of Grant Thornton, the auditors, who have also done an incredible job to deliver an audit remotely on time. I cannot imagine how challenging it is, and I'll let you all into a little secret. Audit works really well when they can stand over you because you've got nowhere to run as the accountant. So there's a great opportunity when they can only collar you remotely to hide from them for a little bit longer, and they've done a really good job to keep on at us, and the team have done a really good job to support them in answering the questions to ensure that these accounts have got to you on time. So I just wanted to publicly state my thanks to both the finance team and the auditors. The management representation letter itself, it's an annual letter that accompanies the statement of accounts. This is essentially the council, myself and the chair of the Audit and Governance Committee, setting out a range of statements which support Grant Thornton in delivering their responsibility as auditors. I have nothing further to say. There's nothing unusual in this year's statement to draw to your attention. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Dave. I think probably the committee can endorse what Dave Hodgson has said here in relation to all the hard work that's gone in and in the difficult circumstances. Okay. Right, well, can we any questions, please?
No hands are raised, Chair.
Okay. So you confirm, members, that you've noted this report, and a show of hands, please, to indicate that.
And I've got, I can see 8 hands. Oh, sorry, thank you, Councillor Hannaford. That's unanimous, Chair, to note the report.
Right, thank you. So that brings us to item 8, the statement of reasons and the issues to the objector in respect of the 2018-19 report, and Grant Thornton will present the matter. Either Jackson, I presume.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, I'll take this one.
Thank you.
So the document on the committee's agenda is, as you said, it's entitled the Statement of Reasons. So this is the output of a process started under by a local elector under the provisions of the Local Audit and Accountability Act 2014, who placed an objection with us to the 2018-19 financial statements. This document is the kind of, I suppose, the results now reporting back to the objector on their issues that they raised and our findings from those issues. Now, because of that, the document itself raises the issues raised to us, the work we've undertaken, our conclusions and the recommendations arising as a result of that work. So I wasn't going to go through that in lots of detail because the document itself sets out the work that we did and our conclusions on this matter. So in terms of the recommendations, you'll note that one of those related to the internal audit report that came to the previous committee, and there was discussion on that report and this matter at that committee. At that committee, it was also confirmed that the objection related to the 2018-19 financial statements at the previous committee was also confirmed that a further £22,000 had been of expenditure had been incurred in the 2019-20 financial year. So that's the year under audit now. I can confirm that since the statement of reasons was issued, no further expenditure has been incurred in respect of the earmarked or taken from the earmarked reserve that was set up in respect of this matter. And as you've heard previously, there's no other significant concerns that we have identified with the 2019-20 financial statements, which we've covered on a previous agenda item today. So that's the document itself. If there's any comments or questions, I'm happy to take any of those comments or questions on the document, but it's for committee's attention that the document has been brought to you.
Thank you very much, Jackson. So, members, do you have any questions on this?
I've got a hand raised from Councillor Mitchell, Chair.
Councillor Mitchell, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is the...
Sorry, Councillor Mitchell, you've muted.
Pardon? Is that all right now? Yes.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. This is the second audit report we've had on this matter. That's one way to be silenced. One by our own internal auditor that we saw at the last meeting, and this one by an external auditor. Both of them are concerning. it is correct that we have changed the grant process, but the grant process wasn't changed in regard to this particular issue. It was a more generic issue in regard to grants. So trying to move things on, I would like to ask the auditor 3 questions in regard to the report he's put in front of us. In this particular case, there was a reference to secret.
Sorry, Councillor Mitchell, I do apologise. I did actually agree, and I am sorry to interrupt you, but Dave Hodgson just wanted to just say a few words before you ask your questions, if that's possible.
All right. Okay.
It's
Yes.
up to the chair.
Councillor Mitchell, would that be all right?
Yes, indeed. I think
Yeah.
that's a sensible thing, Michael Mitchell, to do.
Sorry, Councillor Mitchell.
If that's okay. Yeah. David, please, can you come in first, please?
And I also apologise, Councillor Mitchell, but I think it's important, given the nature of the report and some of the issues that are raised, and particular the fact that the issue of legality is raised within the report. I thought it was important that I discuss with you why I believe it's not a matter of illegal expenditure, which of course would be of great concern to me as Section 151 officer. So just to give some context to members, New Homes Bonus was introduced by the coalition government as an unring-fenced revenue grant. Therefore, that means it can be spent on anything that councils see fit, as long as it's legal, and that can be for either a capital or revenue purpose. In the February 2016, so just prior to the decision on Pinho Community Hub, a resolution was passed as part of the budget by council to allow the New Homes Bonus to be spent in the following ways. £1.1 million was top slice for revenue. £150,000 was set aside for local community projects, and that went through a particular committee that was set up, but the total amount they had was £150,000. There was £39,000 for ward grants, £2 million towards the leisure complex and bus station, and then anything over and above that was left unallocated, and therefore was allowed to council to use as they saw fit, subject to full council approval, as with any budget. So that's New Homes Bonus, and that's the resolution that was worked within on how New Homes Bonus was allocated. So this report came to the executive on the 11th of October 2016. And the resolution of the recommendation was approved at council on the 18th of October 2016. And I'm reading directly the resolution that council approved. And it was that it is recommended that council approve an expenditure budget of £100,000 as Exeter's contribution to the new community hub planned for Pinho. That was it. There were no conditions attached to that £100,000 in any way, shape or form. The statement was just to allocate £100,000. As members who are members of the planning committee or have been members of the planning committee will know, the only thing that matters in terms of the approval of council are the conditions that are attached to a resolution. If they're not attached to the resolution, they do not exist in terms of the approval of council, as we will have experienced in the past, as I said, with developers. Therefore, no conditions were attached. Therefore, it's, in my view, it was perfectly legal to make any expenditure to Pinho Community Hub with or without a business plan in place, because that was not attached as a condition to the approval that council made. And that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Osden. Right. Councillor Mitchell, I'm sorry to have interrupted you there, but I think it was necessary to have that clarification. Please continue with your question.
And thank you. None of my 3 questions relate to what David has spoken about, so I'm not encroaching on his ground, hopefully. The first area, a lot of confusion has occurred about this initial seed corn payment to this body of £10,000 and trying to trace records, etc., in regard to it, the records the council have paid out. So, and the question I want to ask is, does the system require, or should it, when funding outside bodies beyond a certain level of funding, the body receiving the funding should submit audited accounts to the local authority so that payments by the council can be fully audited to the final recipient? Because in this case, we've got this sort of missing part of the jigsaw puzzle for those who want to know as to what the final destination of these funds were. So that one first of all, please.
Yeah, so if I come in on this one to start with Councillor Mitchell, and Dave or Michelle may want to come in as well. So from my point of view, what I would expect for any expenditure incurred by the council is for that to have gone through the relevant approval process as set out in kind of the scheme of delegation. So if a payment's being raised, understanding that the council has considered that payment and approved that as its internal processes and controls require it to be. In terms of should it request audited accounts, I think probably the honest answer is that would be difficult because not every company would produce full financial statements under the Companies Act. So if there was a requirement in there to request an audited set of accounts, not every set of accounts requires an audit under the company's legislation. So that would make that very difficult or impossible in some cases to do. So I think it would be, has the council followed its internal process and control for the raising and authorisation of a payment to a third party?
So just clarify then, under the current system, a recipient of funding would submit paid invoices to the council that they've already paid out to various contractors on their behalf, and the council then refund the body that the grant has been made to cover that expenditure. So how do we know that the expenditure has actually gone against those invoices?
That might be a question for officers rather than ourselves as auditors.
So the purpose of the initial seed funding was to enable it. It became very clear that this was a project in its infancy, and this was the 100,000 would help support trying to get this project off the ground. So the purpose of the £10,000 was to enable them to make those initial payments. So this is a Pinho community hub, a Pinho community led project aiming to deliver a community building. It's not a city council, so it wouldn't have been appropriate for us to directly pay any of the suppliers to Pinho Community Hub. Therefore, they needed some funding to be able to pay them themselves. That was the purpose of the initial £10,000, to provide that. They then issue those and then recover that money to enable them to replenish their funds so that they can then pay the next set of bills as they come out and then come back. They provide us with copies of receipts and or copies of invoices, my apologies, and then we pay those accordingly to them. So, this is an attempt to deliver what I think it's fair to say is something that New Homes Bonus was envisaged for by Eric Pickles when he introduced it in terms of supporting a local community, and therefore it is a positive story for the city.
I must say, none of us are against the principle of the work that's being undertaken. It's just a matter of the audit trail in regard to the funding. If I go on to my second question, throughout your report to us, you talk about references to the business plan and what constitutes a business plan. Could I ask, is it your view or recommendation from Grant Thornton that in regard to our new grant application structure for larger amounts, the larger grant field, would the auditor agree that any business plan there should be seen by both those who sign off at the grants team and by the finance officer prior to submission for formal approval, because the view in this particular one that it was only seen by a different team and not by the finance team.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Mitchell. So from my point of view and from an audit point of view, we would expect any new grants under the new Exeter Grants Programme to follow through the process outlined within the grants programme that was approved by Executive in 2019-20 financial year. In terms of our statement of reasons, one of our recommendations was to ensure that there's an appropriate review of the implementation of that grants policy, to understand that it's being complied with, any conditions that are associated to any funds that are granted are clearly articulated, and that an adequate audit trail is maintained. So from an audit point of view, the council has approved its new grants programme and the way that grants will be funded moving forwards or granted moving forwards. We would expect, having gone through the approval process at council, that policy would be followed, and we've recommended that there's a kind of a post-implementation review to ensure that policy is working as originally envisaged and as designed.
Would at any future stage you be doing an external audit of any of the grants that are funded?
So in terms of our audit, that would depend on probably the size and value of those grants within the financial statement. So as you're probably aware, we audit to the concept of materiality. So we don't audit every penny and pound within the financial statement. So depending on the respective size of those grants, and also whether they were selected in one of our audit samples. So the way we gain assurance is to sample test items. So that's done at random. So if one of those items were selected, then to consider that expenditure, we would want to see the corroborating evidence to support that expenditure, and that may well be the grant approvals and the grant supporting documents behind the payments. So that would very much depend on the size of these grants moving forward, and also whether they were selected as part of an audit sample.
Thank you. And lastly, you state in your report that a councillor was named and identified was not a member of the committee when discussing this matter, and therefore the issue of interest did not arise, and you propose taking no further action. Members are required by the Constitution to draw attention to any relevant interest when committee minutes and reports, etc., are presented to full council. Are you satisfied in this case that any interest has been drawn to the attention of the council when this matter has been before full council?
Thanks, Councillor Mitchell. So I think the matter of individual councillor interests is obviously a matter for them, and they determine those interests. And as you said, the kind of council code of conduct states that they must raise those interests in council meetings. The meetings that were discussed and were alluded to by Dave earlier in 2016, I'm satisfied as set out in the statement of reasons that there's no interest issue that's raised by any of those meetings.
But that was only in relation to committee meetings, not full council.
That's correct. So that Dave also set out the approvals that went through executive and full council in 2016 as well in his comments earlier.
Thank you. That's all, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any further questions, please?
I have a question for Councillor Hannaford, then Councillor Oliver, Chair.
Councillor Hannaford, please.
Thank you, Chair. And I do appreciate, firstly, the detail and you know, going through for probity and in the decisions. But again, and I think it was said before, you know, and that all, of course, is very important. But the bigger picture here, I think, is that we do know that, you know, Pinhoe and the east of the city is having thousands of new houses, often built quite unsustainably by the developers, with not many community facilities or green spaces, or in some cases even places for people to dry their washing or for their children to play. So it is absolutely essential, you know, as a local authority, that I think I'm right that we put in a substantial investment in that part of the city to do anything that we can to foster, you know, community spirit and facilities there, you know, to help mitigate, you know, all the development that's going on. But just specifically, perhaps this is a question for Dave, you know, in a bit of context in terms of sort of pump priming money, when I was the portfolio holder for housing and communities, I was very much involved with the New Court Community Centre. And, you know, as I recall, we were very clear there that not only did we give a capital grant and work with developer contributions to get the building sorted out, we also had a separate budget line to support a community development worker for fundraising and capacity building within the community. So I don't see how that decision, which I still say is the right decision, because again, that's another area of a lot of new build that needs our help, to perhaps the way that we manage things with the funding on this project. I mean, Dave, I mean, I don't see much difference. I think we've got a bit of precedent here in terms of the local authority.
We have that. This is not the only example of the City Council providing support for the building of a new community building. Most recently, Belmont Park and the new community centre in Belmont Park has been built with support from a range of funding, including the City Council, but also Section 106 development monies and some local businesses indeed joining in. So this is not a unique experience for the City Council in providing support, and indeed it is one of the roles that local authorities do in providing support to their communities.
Thank you. I think it's a further question, Mark. I think.
Yeah, so two more, Chair. For Councillor Oliver, then Councillor Mrs. Henson.
Councillor Oliver, please.
The documents that Jackson from Grant Thornton and Councillor Mitchell referred to as the new grants programme was launched in December 2019. Sadly, due to COVID, this new grants programme is akin to the Emperor's new clothes. It was suspended and superseded in late February or early March by the COVID-19 Action Fund, with maximum grants of £3,000 per community group. Currently, maximum grants are £1,000. This COVID-19 Action Fund has been and currently is being robustly reviewed due to the fast-changing circumstances we live in. Sadly, my casework is consisting more and more of people who have lost income due to COVID and find themselves struggling to eat, heat, or even find shelter. I therefore think when we talk about the new grants programme, we need to be aware that whether it is reinstated as envisaged in the short to medium term future is very unlikely. So yes, obviously, if it is, we would need to be very careful in checking all the accounts and making sure large payments of 30,000 had a proper audit trail. But we're talking about a grants programme which sadly was superseded and doesn't actually exist at the moment. I just think we need to be aware of that when we're discussing it.
Okay, thank you for that comment, Councillor Oliver. Councillor
Councillor Mrs. Henson, Chair.
Councillor Mrs. Henson, please.
Thank you, Chairman. There's several things that I would like to bring up. And I support Councillor Mitchell, what he's just said on behalf of this letter. What has concerned me, it is short of over 4.5 years when this was brought to the attention of the councillors. But I'm glad to see, and I do thank Grant Thornton, that there is admitting that there has been a fault here all the way through. But the council hasn't helped itself on this because they've totally denied it. The leader has totally denied it repeatedly at full council for several years now. They talk of also, the letter talks about the past finance officer and leader of the council. Well, when you take on leadership of the council, if you've not brought that up, you've accepted what it is already gone before. By which case, there was difficulties in this. It is what we have no, I have no thing against the hub itself, because it is, as Councillor Hannaford said, these hubs are quite useful and in an area that is going to be needed in the future. And so be it, it will be a success. But what has been argued all the way through, it is the documents that were not clearly signed off in how it was dealt with. Clearly, there's several people, when they have interest and they have it in the huge amounts of money, when you're talking about 100,000 is not huge, but it is a fair size of amount of money. When that goes into a account, that person, it should be identified any political party involved, and it was not. Can I also say that in fact, can I ask the 151 offer, Dave, can I ask you, there's one thing that may ask it. Would you, only you would know whether you were drawn into something you were uncomfortable to accept when we brought this forward, or the sitting councillor brought this forward. Were you comfortable? Were you not forced, but the senior officer involved, and it is a new officer at the moment, should have been one that should have actually been watching this when it was brought forward to you? And were you felt uncomfortable accepting this as 151 officer? Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank
David,
you. Shall I answer that last point first?
Yes, please.
So in terms of this as Section 151 officer, I am perfectly comfortable with the fact that the council has properly approved £100,000 of appropriately funded appropriate money in the proper manner for an appropriate use. Therefore, I have never ever been, and I wouldn't be forced into this. The role of Section 151 officer, I do report to councillors, but my ultimate responsibility is to the taxpayer of the city, not to councillors, and therefore it would be absolutely inappropriate, and I could not do my job if I was forced into accepting something. This has been properly approved by council, by all councillors. I don't know that there was any votes against the approval of this funding at the time, and therefore I am perfectly comfortable that the council has acted properly in terms of approving this, and from my point of view, that's the most important thing.
Thank
you,
you,
David. Thank you. Any further questions on this matter, please?
Wave it about, Dave.
Councillor David Henson, Chair.
Councillor David Henson, please.
Mr. Chairman, coming in on this one, because Councillor Hanford's quite right. We're not, nobody I don't think is against the hub in Pinhoe. It's definitely needed, and we're all for it. Our bigged problem was that 4 years ago, the wrong process was put in power. It was put in use by everybody, and there were shortcuts made by council to get the money put forward. That's all it comes to at the end of the day. And that's all we're arguing about. And now that the Grant Thornton have come forward, I blame them as well, because they should have done a better audit. But now that they've come forward and made the recommendations, I accept those recommendations and hope we can get on to leave this one in the end long run. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Right, okay. Any further questions, please?
No other hands are raised there, Chair.
No other hands raised, okay. So we note, can we have a show of hands to note this statement of reasons letter, please?
Mr. Chair, there are recommendations within this. Surely we should be both noting the report and accepting the recommendations in the report rather than just noting it?
Yes, agreed.
Can I have some clarification on that, please?
Yes, sir. We note the report and accept the recommendations contained on page 13 of this report.
Can I clarify from Jackson
Yes,
that
please
that's the
clarify that
purpose?
one, please. Yes, please.
Is that what you're expecting?
It's not, no. So the recommendations are from ourselves as the external auditor to the council. So by issuing this letter, we are stating that these are recommendations that the council must adhere to. In our normal audit reporting, so in our ISA 260 report, the audit findings report, there may be recommendations within that report as well. We wouldn't expect the committee to approve those recommendations. Those are recommendations that, as your external auditor, we see and deem to be appropriate, and that's why when the letter is sent to the objector, it is also copied to the council, and we review those recommendations and the follow-up work done against them. So this is more to note for committee's attention and discussion as we've had, but we don't need committee to approve the recommendation.
Thank you. So we note the letter, members?
Yes.
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 Okay. Can we have a show of hands to that effect?
That's a unanimous vote to note those, Chair.
Unanimous vote. Thank you. So that then takes us to item 9, the internal audit report, and the audit manager, Helen Kelvey, to present it, please. Helen.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'd like to present to the committee our progress report for the second quarter of the year, which ended in 30th of September. Members will remember that at the last meeting, we made some amendments to our audit plan as a result of the impact of the COVID-19 epidemic. So we're now working to a revised annual audit plan, and I would like to report that progress against the plan is good. But just to say that it is a very flexible plan this year, and it's anticipated, again, obviously, that we will probably have to come back to this committee at the next meeting to make some further amendments. For this meeting, we're proposing that we actually postpone some planned audit work of the Sport England project to next year, 2021. We have agreed this with the relevant director, the Director of Transformation. This is to enable us to be flexible around future work that's coming our way in terms of the current lockdown that we're seeing. We're seeing additional work for payment of the business grants. So what we need from this committee is just to note that. We have attached to this report our Appendix A, which is the completion of the audit work we've undertaken this last quarter. Happy to take questions on that. Appendix C also is our quarterly report to this committee around the significant issues on the corporate governance statement, and there is an update on each of those significant issues. So again, happy to take any questions on that. I don't really think there's anything further I need to highlight within our report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Helen. Any questions, members, please?
I can't see any hands raised, Chair.
Okay, well, I think this one requires a roll call, Mark, doesn't it? Because we have the amendment to the plan detailed in section 8.2.
Yes, Chair. I've just put the recommendations on the screen. So can I ask members to please vote if you're for, against, or abstaining, please, when I call your name? Councillor Atkinson, please.
I agree.
Well, thank you. Councillor Foggin. Councillor Foggin.
Sorry, 4.
Thank you. Councillor Hannaford, please.
4.
Thank you. Councillor David Henson.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs. Henson.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Mitchell.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Oliver.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Warwick.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Wardle.
Or
that is a unanimous vote in favour, Chair. Those recommendations have been carried.
many thanks. Okay. So that now brings us to item 10, overview of the Redmond report recommendations, and the Director of Finance, Dave Hodgson, will present the report. Dave.
Thank you, Chair. At a previous Audit and Governance Committee, I promised to update members of the committee on the recommendations from the Redmond review into the state of local authority accountability and the external audit market. So I have produced a very quick report setting out those recommendations. I would just like to make the following observations, not wishing to fire up councillors, and certainly not wishing for your ire to be aimed at two members of external audit from what I'm about to say, but the report has come down very much in favour of the external audit market and the firms within. So if the recommendations are approved, it will mean higher costs for local authorities for external audit work. Tony Redmond was persuaded that the current fee structure does not work. I have said this to you previously, that I think he's correct, and that the external audit market at the last tender probably went a step too far in terms of that. But then in terms of the understandability, he's also kind of come down against local authorities. So he's recommending a further financial statement be produced, which somewhere will sit between the budget monitoring reports we do and the statement of accounts and there's a whole host of statements within the statement of accounts already. So it's yet another one which they think will make it more straightforward for the local taxpayer, but I suspect will further confuse them at a point where our financial position is not getting any better, and in fact, along with all local authorities, is struggling considerably under COVID-19. It means that we're likely to face additional costs in more than one way from this report. I'm happy to take any questions. As I said, although I've said it's come out on the external audit favour, it is not the result of work by Grant Thornton, and it is not their choice. So I'm happy to take any questions you may have.
Many thanks, Dave, for that. Right, any questions, members, please?
Question from Councillor Atkinson, Chair.
Councillor Atkinson, please.
Oh, thank you. Mr. Hodgson, if you go back to 2010, there was a thing called the Audit Commission, wasn't there? And that was a public-private sector partnership, wasn't it? There were publicly employed auditors and a range of private sector auditors that went round and audited local authorities. And so some would get private sector, some would get public sector. And at that time, I wasn't aware there was any significant problems whatsoever in audit and the way it was conducted or the price of it. And then when the Conservatives came, they decided that they would do away with that because they thought competition amongst all auditors should be private sector, and that competition amongst auditors would provide a better service and cheaper. And it's right, isn't it, that hasn't panned out, has it? And what we've seen is competition to the bottom, that there are not enough auditors coming forward. And now we're in this situation where the audit has to rise because of the government's adherence to privatisation. would you say there is something in that, and that what we need to do is perhaps a return to that model?
I would suggest that's perhaps too political a question for me to
Well, I
to
just
answer.
meant in terms of value
Apologies.
for money.
However,
Value for money.
However, what I would state as statements of facts are that the transition from 2010 and the abolition of the Audit Commission has undoubtedly resulted in cheaper audit and significantly cheaper audit. I quote the fact that when I undertook my first set of accounts back in 2002 for Exeter, the external audit note I had to produce showed our external audit fee to be around £104,000. And this year it's around 45,000. Plus there will be some additions, but you know, 45 to £50,000 roughly this year. So there has been a massive drop in the price. Where it hasn't worked is that it has there's two things. Firstly, the external audit for local authorities is run on a similar basis as external audit for private companies, and it doesn't really work, and it forces the external auditors to work to a set of standards that are aimed at protecting shareholders as opposed to aimed at protecting taxpayers. And that to me is one of the most fundamental things that needs to change. We need to have a different body that external audits report to in respect of public audit, because it is different, and things that are maybe less material in our accounts may be more important in terms of the value they provide to taxpayers. Whereas in a private sector set of accounts, the most material figures, because they all matter towards profit and loss, are the things that auditors must focus on. There are things that our external auditors could better focus on that would give taxpayers a better assurance over the money that we spend than the things that they have to do. That's not their fault. That is the way that the system is currently set up. And the single best thing that could come from this is for the external auditors to be freed from having to report to the Financial Reporting Council as it currently stands, in my opinion. So it's very much cheaper than it was. Whether it's better is difficult. It's difficult to produce an audit. They have the same standards to work to, but less money in order to provide that. The recommendations propose not the Audit Commission. They are quite clear it is not the Audit Commission, but a different body to take over some of the responsibilities from some of the bodies that currently have it. If that includes the responsibilities for setting the external audit in place of the Financial Reporting Council, that may be of benefit to the taxpayer and to councillors.
Well, thank you, Dave, for that. Any further questions, please?
No hand up. Councillor Hannaford did have a hand up, but I don't know if it's been withdrawn.
Yeah, no, it's all right. Dave's actually answered the question I was going to ask. Thank you.
Thank you. So if there are no further questions, we need just a show of hands to note this report, please. Have a show of hands.
That's a unanimous vote in favour, Chair, to note the report.
Thank you. So that brings us to item 11, review of corporate risk register, and the audit manager, Helen Kelby, will present the report. Helen.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just presenting this updated corporate risk register to committee. Firstly, can I just apologise to members for the fact that the new risk that's been put onto the risk register didn't appear on the papers that went out originally with the agenda. This is an administrative error in the way that the documents get converted when they go out to members. So hopefully members have had that updated risk, albeit at short notice today. So again, apologies for that. I do have, and we did ask for some questions in advance on the corporate risk register. First of all, Councillor Atkinson raised a question at Chair's briefing, Councillor Atkinson, and I'd like to come back with a response for you on that, if that's okay with you.
Please go ahead.
Okay, so Councillor Atkinson's question was regarding item 9 on the risk register, which is the failure to meet the council's housing supply. And her question was whether the GESP was definitely no longer going ahead. So the response to that I've now got is, and I will read this to you. So there is a report going to executive next week on the 1st of December, making a recommendation to full council that the council formally withdraws from preparing the Greater Exeter Strategic Plan following the withdrawal of East Devon District Council in August 2020. In principle, agreement is being sought to proceed with a non-statutory joint strategy and infrastructure plan. So that's the response to the question raised. Hopefully that's answered Councillor Atkinson's query.
Yes. Thank you, Helen, for that. Yvonne, did you want to comment on that, please?
No, that's fine. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. Any further questions on the corporate risk register, please?
Chair, sorry, I believe that Councillor Mitchell has some questions and he did provide them in advance. So if he would like to put the questions where I have a response, I can respond to him if that's okay with you. Okay,
far away, Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you, Chair. In regard to item 1, it's identified on the form that a potential cause or problem with the Sensible Point project is failure to procure appropriate operators for the leisure centre. I was assuming this would be updated now that the council has agreed to take the running of these centres in-house. So I'm just my general point was, not as well as that specific point, how often are the causes and impacts updated as distinct from just a column at the end that just gives some factual updates?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Mitchell. The response to that is, in theory, the whole of the corporate risk register should be updated at the same time that we obtain the comments. Obviously, in the case of item 1 on the risk register, that wasn't the case, and I can only apologise for that.
Thank you. Second question is in relation to 2, which I've mentioned at a previous meeting. Most of the work that we've dealt with within COVID in relationship to the local community has been through grant funding and working with the voluntary sector and other bodies. And there's no mention of that within our community cohesion strategy. And I would have assumed possibly it would have been there, because when COVID is mentioned later on, it's really in the context of the functioning of the council, not the relationship of the council to the community.
Yes, thank you for that, Councillor Mitchell. The response on this one, I've been unable to obtain. The director that actually is responsible and the risk owner on this item is was not actually available today. So I'm afraid that is something that I will have to come back to you on. I will provide a response to this for Sharon for circulation to the committee when I've received it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
As with counteracts on number 9, it's just a matter of the third potential cause of lack of housing supply is student development cannot be included in the housing supply figures as a result of the High Court case. But at 2 recent planning meetings where we've dealt with student accommodation stroke co-living, it's been clearly stated in the planning information background that this does count towards our housing supply. So does that particular point need clarification?
If you could, sorry, apologies. If you bear with me 1 second, I need to open the response that I've received on this item. Okay, so the response, and I will read it to you, is that there was a High Court judgment in 2015 in which the council was told that we cannot count purpose-built student accommodation towards meeting our adopted housing requirement / 5-year land supply. That is because the council's current adopted housing requirement does not take full account of the growth in student numbers that have been experienced in Exeter in recent years. This will be the position until the council has adopted the new local plan for Exeter, containing a new housing requirement that does take account of the increased number of students in the city. There is no definitive legal ruling about the counting or otherwise of co-living housing towards local planning authority housing requirements. However, it would seem reasonable to assume that co-living housing can be counted towards the council's adopted housing requirement, because unlike student accommodation, anyone can occupy a co-living home. That's the
Thank you for
response
that
I
one.
have on that
And
one.
lastly, on item 11, maintaining the financial sustainability of the council, and it relates to a question I raised with the auditor earlier. Do we not need to include any potential risk of a decline in the capital values of our commercial estate?
Thank you. I think Dave Hodgson will be responding to this item, Councillor.
Thank you, Councillor Mitchell. Can I just come back on the first 2 points, which I thought were really good questions in terms of the first 2 questions that you asked, and state that as a management board, I'm going to suggest we do something slightly different. Rather than get the individual risk owners to update the risk register in the future, we'll bring it collectively to the strategic management board together, so we can challenge each other and make sure that we update things like that, because it's quite easy when it's you on your own just to miss something, and we shouldn't really be doing that. So we will try and put in place a better system to ensure that doesn't happen in the future. In respect of this question, it's a really good question. However, what I would say is that local authorities have a statutory override to protect us from issues with the market value of commercial properties. So our commercial portfolio, which is worth around £52 million, could increase to £56 million, or it could decrease to £30 million. Neither of those changes would impact on the council taxpayer. We have a statutory override where we put it away in a separate reserve under by law, and it doesn't impact on the council taxpayer. The government have already put in place protections to ensure that council taxpayers aren't at risk from those massive fluctuations that you can get in commercial property.
Just as a follow-up there, Deb, does that impact on these councils who've gone to an investment portfolio, commercial property up and down the country, and have seen massive declines in the capital valuations and rentals?
So the capital valuations won't be an issue for them. Non-collection of rent would be an issue for them. But in terms of the changes in the capital value, that will not have an impact on the council taxpayer in those areas. It could be valued, and this is one of the reasons. It's a material figure in our accounts. So under the current way that external audit works, it's an important figure for external audit. But the reality is there's a statutory override, which means it doesn't impact on the council taxpayer. That gives you 2 assurances. One, there's no need for me to try and manipulate that figure, because it won't have an impact on the council taxpayer at all. And secondly, you can be comforted that they are protected and it won't cause financial distress to the council.
Isn't there a liability for those councils who borrowed to do this investment, then find the rental income doesn't cover the repayments on the loan?
So that's a different matter. So if you have borrowed money and you're seeking to make money out of this, then absolutely you need those rental incomes to at least cover the cost of the borrowing. That's a different issue, and that relates to the rental income and the ability to recover the rental income you need. For us, we only have 2 of our 900 commercial properties that have any borrowing attached to them. In overall terms, our portfolio and the rental income is circa £4.5 million against an annual requirement to repay borrowing of around, just trying to do it off the top of my head, between £200,000 and £300,000. So we are vastly overcovered and would not it would be almost impossible for us to end up in that sort of situation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions, please?
Councillor Hannaford, Chair.
Councillor Hannaford.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to get a better understanding of the additional papers that we received today under the appendix in regard to Sidwell's point, and the fact that we'll need additional funding for the project. And I mean, I've seen obviously reports that, you know, there's been COVID-19 infections there. So it's really just to get an understanding in terms of what's driving those costs. I'm assuming it's additional PPE, perhaps high levels of testing, and also the potential delays to the project and where those costs actually fall. So I mean, I wouldn't want you to obviously go into any detail that wasn't in the public domain, but I think as an audit committee, we need to sort of know at least what the drivers are for those additional costs whenever they're agreed and settled.
Thank you.
Thank you. This is Councillor Hannaford's very, very astute. This is it's an ongoing situation, and it is quite commercially sensitive. Therefore, to talk about it in any great detail would probably require us to go into part 2, as this is a matter that's unsettled. In terms of general conversation around, so this isn't preempting anything to do with the negotiation, but in terms of delivering St Sidwell's point, you're absolutely right that the contractor has had to be COVID compliant, and that's meant not only additional PPE, for example, but also a reduced number of people on site, which makes things take longer. So these are just general comments about the types of things that may cause the site to overrun. What I would say, and what my section 151 comments state at the front of this report, is this is only one of many financial challenges facing the council caused by the COVID-19. You as members, you all stepped up in July, produced an emergency budget to help protect the council, reducing our spend or covering a potential £11.2 million gap in our funding. So there are other areas that I would suggest will have a greater financial impact, and there are greater financial risks, not least your car parking income next year. Car parking income is obviously running at the emergency budget. It was running at our expectation was being down 50%. I would suggest with the latest lockdown, it will be worse than that by the end of the financial year. Fortunately, this year we are covered by sales fees and charges compensation scheme from central government. I wouldn't suggest that car park income and car parking habits will just magically go back to how they were pre-COVID on the 1st of April next year. So there are risks and challenges. What I would say in January, I'm doing a pitch for my own briefing here. In January, I'll be doing my usual budget briefing for all members. And in that, we'll talk to you about the assumptions we're making in the budget, the risks that we have to some of our income streams, and some of the mitigations we're putting in or proposing that you put in place in the budget to help to offset those. So if you wanted me to go into any more specific detail about St Sidwell's point, I think we would have to go into part 2. But that's just a flavour of the overall challenges that COVID-19's putting on our financial position.
Thank you, David. Rob, is that?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just think it's important that we actually delicately flag up what's driving it. You know, rather than sort of having Chinese whispers. It's other things like I don't know, a structural problem or something. It's actually, as Dave has outlined, events and circumstance, and that's what's driving the overspend. So that's fine. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any further questions, please?
Councillor Mrs Henson, Chair.
Chair, can I ask the lady involved in this, could she send this to me in paper form, please, what was late on this risk, please, for the point?
Yes, Sharon, would you be able to do that for Councillor Henson?
Yes, of course, I will. I'll try and get into the office in the next couple of days.
Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you. Any further questions? If not, can we note this report with a show of hands? And that includes, of course, the new risk number 14. So can we have a show of hands, please? To note it.
I can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Councillor Oliver, are you abstaining? Thank you. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I've got 7. Is that no vote from Mr. and Mrs. Henson?
Yes.
Abstaining.
Abstaining. Thank you.
Yeah. Only because we haven't seen the papers.
Thank you. That's 7 votes in favour with 2 abstentions, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Right, well, that brings us to the end of the proceedings. I set to note the date of the next meetings, the 10th of March 2021. So thanks very much for your time this evening, and enjoy the rest of it.
Thank you, Chairman. Leave.